Hey, this is Roy Cannaday.
And this is Mike DiLisio.
And we're taking a look at Tiny Epic Tactics from Gamelin Games.
This is the newest in the Tiny Epic line. Roy, let's take a look at how this game plays.
Let's do it. Alright, in Tiny Epic Tactics, each player is given 4 characters. 1 fighter, 1 wizard, 1 rogue, and 1 beast. And on your turn, you'll be able to take 3 actions. You can either take a move action, which allows you to move a character on the board. So let's say you have a character here, and you want to move him. You have a certain number of speeds. So Gamelin here has a speed of 4. You can move 4 spaces. So empty plains here, like open area, just cost 1 movement per space. If you move into water, that costs extra 1. If you move up into hills, that costs extra. And then if you want to move, you can move through these different portals on the board, and you can take 1 movement to move to any other portal on the board. So you can you're a lot closer than you think when you're playing the game as far as movement goes, because there are portals all over this board, as you can see here. You get 3 actions. You can take them with any of your characters, but if you can't take the same action twice in 1 turn, like you can't double move, but you could move and then attack, or you could move and then do a magic attack. You can just do different things. You just can't do the same thing twice. When you do an attack, basically it's very deterministic here. You have your character card here. This is going to be the amount of damage you'll do to the enemy. You have life points with your little life tracker here. That'll go down, and you're trying to knock out your opponents. Your movement's here, that's 4. And then there is a range attack for some characters. Your fighter and your rogue will have some range. You can do those as well. When you do the attack action, you're going to roll the number of dice shown on your thing here, and you're looking for basically the knockback symbols here. And this will push bad guys out of the way and push them back. If you get some, they will move backwards that many spaces. There's a lot of area control in this game, so pushing guys out of spaces is really good. If you're doing a range attack, you'll have a certain number of range here on the card. This guy has 2, and then it'll do 2 damage, and then you'll immediately move down your little range marker 1 space, and then you will roll this many dice to see if you have to move it down extra spaces. For each of the broken arrows, you'll also move it down that many spaces, which will make it so you can use that attack less times. And if you hit somebody in range, you'll do that much damage to them. If anyone's ever knocked all the way out, their hit points go all the way down, then they're going to be captured. Whoever captures and takes the last damage to somebody will get 2 victory points at the end of the game. And victory points is basically the way you win, but you're trying to knock out your opponents and get victory points several different ways. Another way to get victory points is by controlling the different flag markers here. So players are going to be trying to control those as well. So people are going to be moving into those. If you end your turn in the center space on one of these flag things, and you have your character there and you control it at the beginning of the next turn, you'll put it on the little flag card here. And you'll move it up 1 each round. Once a certain number of control markers are here, if you're the person that pushes it over, you'll get 5 points, and then once you have a certain number of these have happened, that'll actually trigger the end of the game. So you're trying to get all these control markers out and be the person who's the one who pushes it over. It never goes back regardless of which player is on it, so you want to be the person controlling it when it goes across the finish line, basically. There are also magic attacks in the game as well. You have different mages, and they're going to have to spend their magic very similar to how you spend arrows, but then it's also going to have a special ability here. This is the range of the magic. It can go 4 spaces away from this character, and then you can choose to spend extra magic to roll 1 to 3 dice. And then we'll do an extra thing here. This is going to heal a target ally for 2 hit points and cure their weakness. If you ever take 2 actions with the same character, because you can choose, you have 3 actions each turn, you can choose to do the same character. If you choose to use the same character twice in 1 turn, like say you move and attack, you'll put a weakness token on them, and then on their next turn, they either have to take 2 damage to remove the weakness token or not be activated on that turn. As you have characters get knocked away, if you have 3 characters left, you're you're still going to have 3 actions. If you only have 2 characters left, you're going to have 3 actions still, but then weakness doesn't affect you anymore. But you can't have one character do all 3 actions. If you only have 1 character left, you can have that character do all 3 actions and they can't be weakened, so they can run across the board. So even as your characters are getting defeated, you're still going to be taking the same number of actions and be able to run around and do all sorts of different stuff. Another thing about movement is some of the different terrain types. Like say you end in a village here, you're going to be able to heal 4 hit points and move your stuff back up. Like say my little rogue here ended in the village and he was out of arrows. He'll be able to fill this back up and heal his hit points up 4, which is awesome to not get knocked out. And then also, if you're on mountains, you basically have range to anywhere on the board. And when you're shooting from up high, you get extra range by 1 if you're shooting to a lower elevation. And if you move into these ballista spaces, you can basically deal damage and knock people back. I think it's 2 damage, and you can knock somebody back when you move onto it if you end up pushing yourself to make that happen. Awesome. And then the only other ways you get points in the game are by if you end the game on a village, you'll get an extra point, and you're just trying to capture the flags, knock out your opponents, and go to victory. In Tiny Epic Tactics, basically you can do lots of different play modes, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's really good multiplayer because you're all chasing and trying to control those different areas and knock people out. Well, let's see what we think about it. After each player has taken their actions for a turn, you're going to get a tactic card. You're going to start the game with 1, and then you're going to get more. But these tactic cards are going to do all sorts of different things. But this one says after you move an ally, and you have all of your allies in a single control area, the majority control of that area, then immediately advance the control marker 1 space on the track. There's all sorts of different of these tactics cards, and utilizing them can really give you lots of cool advantages if you're able to set up the formations and stuff you need on the board. So that's another thing you can do to get a little bit of advantage in Tiny Epic Tactics. All right, so Tiny Epic Tactics. This is a small little skirmish game. Pretty cool that it fits in such a small box, and I like what they did with like the whole 3D like board that comes out of this box. They fit a whole lot in this little package.
They do, and that's kind of a touchstone of this series, is getting a lot of game into a small package. Now, some people have issues with that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
They feel like that maybe there's some usability issues, but this game, I think specifically, doesn't have that problem. The nesting boxes inside, I don't think that they are trying to do too much with this package. I think that the actual functionality of the game is good. You don't struggle to get the components in and out of the box.
Yeah.
I think the footprint is just fine. Even with my old eyes, I don't really struggle to see what's going on. So I have no problem with that aspect of the game.
Yeah, I definitely like the whole 3D aspect of how the board plays out, and you're like going up and down terrains, and you can get like extra range when you're up higher, and you can try to like scope out the thing. I also really enjoy the fact that like there's these little portals that basically make the map. I mean, it looks like a small map, but it becomes an extremely small map when you factor in all the portals. It's like, oh, well, I go from here to the other side of the board, and I'm right there.
Exactly.
Which I think is important for the area control aspect of this and making it so you can all jump on those different areas.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I also appreciate that although there is elevation, right, and there's different terrain that you have to account for, not a lot. There's really not that much you have to remember. Oh, and most of it makes thematic, actually all of it makes thematic sense. I'm in the forest. I've got a little bit of cover. It's harder to hit me there. I'm in the water. I'm more vulnerable. I can't get around, so I take more damage there. It's going to give me take me an extra bit of movement to climb up this ridge. That all makes sense.
But when you're on the ridge, then you can shoot further.
Exactly. So yeah, that I think they did well. They put enough in there that it's something you have to think about when you're moving around the map, but you don't have to get bogged down in remembering, okay, so what's my line of sight here? What's my movement? It's pretty straightforward. It's not too much to keep track of.
I definitely think one of the strengths of the game is that, I mean, you have 4 different character types, but then there's a huge variety that they've put in this box. I have the deluxe version. I'm not sure if it adds a lot more characters or if it's the same amount in the other version, so I don't really have anything else to compare it to. But there's a whole bunch of different characters, and each time you play the game, you can kind of have like a slightly different character with a different power. There's a lot of replayability that it sort of adds into that portion of it, of like, oh, I'm going to have this character with this character this time. Or next time I'm going to have this rogue with that beast. beast this time.
Yeah.
You know, so that can help you mix it up, and it's interesting to see how those powers subtly affect the game, and like the stats that the different characters have can be very important too. So it's cool to figure out how to min-max those things, and you're kind of randomly giving them out at the beginning anyway.
Sure, yeah.
So you got to make the best of the team that you're given. But I feel like they're pretty balanced overall.
They seem to be. I mean, from the games I've played, what I do like about it is the idea that you are randomly getting these characters at the beginning of the game, but they're basically 4 archetypes, right?
Right.
And so you know that the beasts are going to be stronger in the melee combat, and you've got your warrior, the warrior is going to be also good, but also they have a ranged attack as well,
which might run out.
Yeah, it very well might, but yeah, they do seem to be relatively balanced, but you don't feel like you're playing the same. Every beast isn't the same as every other beast. Every warrior is not the same as every other warrior. They do a good job of putting in some special powers, some special abilities, so that you do feel like you've got some variety in your gameplay, which is nice.
I also think it's super interesting how deterministic like the combat is in this game. It's literally like you walk up to somebody, you do 3 damage to them, and you might have a chance of like knocking them back.
Right.
So that's sort of interesting the way that works. And then also like with the magic powers, sometimes those can be a little bit more random, but it's like you automatically know you're going to do this much damage.
Right,
Normally
exactly.
it's like 2 damage, but then you can spend extra magic to try to like roll dice to do extra damage, or there's all sorts of different effects that you can have on those. Like maybe it tangles somebody up, maybe it pushes somebody, maybe
it could heal even.
Maybe it heals another one of your allies.
Right.
So depending on the character you get, it can be very different, but it can add that whole randomness effect into the deterministic combat that would otherwise be in the game.
Yeah, I think there's a decent balance of luck to strategy. Anytime you have dice, there's going to be a luck component there. But like you said, I do think that that's mitigated by the fact that you're guaranteed to do a particular amount of damage. And then if you want to press your luck, or if you're able to, you can spend some of your mana, or the one thing you have to worry about is an ranged attack. You may have to spend extra ammo. But you have to be able to have that to make the attack. So that helps with it a little bit too.
I also find like with the range thing and the fact that you could run out of arrows, or you could run out of magic with all this stuff, it makes it interesting because there's also a bunch of locations on the board that are the villages, which you can hop into and heal that back up, and get your magic back up, get your arrows back up, get your health back up. But then of course you're not controlling areas with that character.
Exactly.
So it's like this interesting balance in between that sort of stuff as well.
Right. And I guess it's good for us to talk just briefly about the fact that we're really reviewing the standard mode of the game, right? There are different ways to play this game, and so when we talk about area control, really in the standard version, what you're trying to do is one of 2 things. You're either trying to control these flags through area control, or you're trying to knock out all of your other opponents' guys or girls, units, basically. And so I was going to ask, how do you think that area control works? I mean, do you feel like that's a well done part of the game? Do you feel like that's something that works well?
I feel like with the 2-player mode of the game, I feel like it's very much going to be like it's going to snowball. Like if one character starts doing really good and they end up starting to knock out someone else's characters, they're not going to have as many characters at area control. They're just going to like dogpile. I feel like this game's a lot more fun multiplayer, so that way you can kind of like self-balance. If someone starts to get ahead and they start taking this area, maybe somebody's like, oh no, can jump in there. But if when we play 2 players and it was a close game, maybe not.
Not so much.
Not that close of a game. But it's kind of like one of those things where if you start doing really good, you can continue to do really good. There's not a whole lot of catch-up in this, but I feel like when you play it multiplayer, the other players help with that catch-up and can be like, oh man, they're doing really good. Even though we've both been knocked down, we can work together to make sure they're not going to take that area, sort of thing.
And I agree with you. I've played it across the player count, and just stick to 2, 3, and 4 at this point. I do find that it's better at the 3 and 4 player count. At 2, like you said, there's a bit of a rich get richer type of a thing where it's hard to come back if you've kind of gone all in on an area and you lose out for one reason or another. And maybe that's just poor play, but also you could have some bad die rolls. You could have some things happen that are not quite as much in your control as maybe you would like. So I do like it more at the larger player counts, I think.
And they also have like tactics cards in there that you can try to utilize well. And if your characters are in the right position to be able to figure out how to pull those off, you can get extra bonuses in the game. And I think in our game, it was kind of very much like I was running around to the village healing up my guys, and then also very much like utilizing those tactics cards to put my characters to like, I can can move, and now I get to attack you, sort of thing, because I went through these portals, or I landed on a village, and because I did that, I can teleport to this other village. And figuring out how to utilize those are very key to like making strategies work. And I mean, that's another luck thing. Maybe you get one that's really easy to pull off. Maybe you get one that's not as easy to pull off. But it's kind of like an interesting element that adds to the game, and you get those each turn as well.
Right. Yeah.
So you can try to set up these combos, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's true. They're all the if-then cards. If you do this, then this happens. And you do bring up a good point there in that they can be a way to kind of give you a direction,
right?
You know, and I think sometimes the mistake I've made in this game, not just in the game that you and I played, is that I tend to look at those as more, well, if this happens, that's great. Or perhaps I should be looking at my tactics cards and saying, how do I make this if happen so that I can, you know, get there?
But it's kind of like a strange balance as well, because you don't want to like mess up your strategy by going out of the way to do it.
Right.
But at the same time, you want to kind of set yourself up that not only are you doing it, but also it's advantageous for you to do it.
Right.
You know?
Exactly right.
Because there was a lot of situations where like, if you do this and then this, then you get to attack. And I was like, well, I'm not in a position now to even be in a place to attack to be able to do that. So it's like I have to move the guys to the right point. It's like, okay, now I do those things. Now I play this card.
Yeah,
you know,
it's true. It's true. This is a tactic skirmish game, and you know, I had played an earlier version, a pre-production version, which was pretty similar to this version that we've played. And when I played it, I had a really strong first impression when I played it. I've since played more tactical skirmish games.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of these style games coming out right now as well.
And that had not been a big part of my gaming history. But since that first time I played it, I've played Wildlands, and I've played Funkoverse, and I've played Unmatched.
Right.
I don't know that you can look at this game in a bubble. I mean, you can to an extent, but there are other small, quick, tactical skirmish games around now. And so what's been interesting to me is that now I have more points of comparison for this game than I did the first time I played it. And if I'm being honest, it has to some extent tempered my initial love for it. I still think it's a very solid game. Don't get me wrong. I really do. But
there's a lot of these style games.
There really are, and you know, and I think you maybe have had more of a history with them than I have even.
Right. Yeah, I grew up playing like Hero Clicks and all sorts of like tactical like games where you're running around a board and doing stuff. And the good thing about this one is that it's tiny and fits in a small box. Yeah. But overall, I feel like it also feels slightly limited by that sort of thing. You know, it's kind of like, okay, cool. I mean, it does what it does good, but at the same time, it's like, okay, well, it's this tiny sort of game, and you don't get the whole big sprawling aspect of it. It's very deterministic as well, which you have to kind of like that combat.
Sure, that's also true. So how do you feel it stacks up compared to some of the other skirmish games you've played recently?
I mean, overall, I really like a lot of the, I, of course, like miniatures and all that stuff, and all that stuff adds to the flavor and the feel. The thing that this does, it's crazy because like I play those other games and they don't have the whole 3D effect and stuff.
That's true.
I feel like most of the time I probably would reach for some of those other games before this one, but if I was traveling or running around somewhere or was on the go, or just needed something that wasn't going to fill up a big footprint, I wouldn't mind throwing tactics out if I was going to have that multiplayer situation. I think the other games probably do better at 2 players than this does, for sure.
That's a good point. So maybe this is a good time to just kind of talk about overall positives and negatives, and maybe who might like this game, who this game might be for. I guess I can start with that. To me, some of the positives are something you've mentioned. I think that 3-dimensional terrain is the hook. That's the thing that really sets this game apart.
And you can actually get the other terrains too. You got the desert terrain, and there's like a snowy one as well, and those are like little boxes that pop on top. And you can see some like pictures of those, but it's pretty interesting how they've made it so even though the same shaped terrain, you can get several different maps out of it.
Right, that's true. And to me, that's a big plus. I think that and the fact that it has that addition to gameplay without too much rules overhead, which I mentioned before, I think is really good. So that to me is probably the biggest positive of the game. The game length is for me also another positive. It does not outstay its welcome.
Oh yeah, it's quite a short game.
It really is, and that's across the player counts, 2, 3, and 4. It plays relatively quickly. It scales well, I think, in that sense, although when I say scales well, I mean by time. I think we've already established that we both like the game better at larger player counts.
Yes, for sure.
Negatives, that would be one of them for me, is the fact that I don't think it's as strong of a 2-player game as it is a 3- and 4-player game. I do think that there's a bit of a I've gone games where I've maybe played one tactic card.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that's a bit of a negative too. I do wish that there was more, but you do cycle them, and perhaps that's me as a gamer not taking advantage of those cards. Basically every turn you're getting a new one. There's a hand limit of 2, so oftentimes you're just cycling out. Oh yeah, I don't like this one, I'll take this one. But there have been games where I haven't used them a lot. I kind of wish that there was more of an element of that there.
Yeah, I do feel like this is going to be very much a game where the winner will probably be the person, since the combat's so deterministic, is the person that figures out how to be in the right place at the right time, but also figures out how to utilize the special abilities on their characters and their tactics cards. It's like, oh, this character can carry another character. Like when we played, I had a character that could do that. I didn't really do that a lot, but I probably would have been better off if I was utilizing my powers even better than I already have. And just more experience with the game. I mean, I feel like people could probably play this a bunch and really figure out how to dig into those powers, you know?
Yeah. Do you think it has a strong replayability? Would that be a plus to you, do you think?
I don't know. Overall, I mean, I feel like it's okay, and I feel like the wide breadth that you have of different powers helps with replayability.
Sure.
But overall, it's going to be the same game. Area control. You're going out there. You're trying to get the flags. You're trying to hold the same sort of thing. That stuff's all going to be the same from game to game, you know. And they have several different play modes. You actually played the solo mode as well.
I did. And the solo mode, I'll just speak very briefly about it. It's, in some ways, the mechanics are very similar, but the experience is very different.
Gotcha.
Instead of the outside, the exterior of the boxes that are now your stacked maps, which is still there, whenever you enter a portal, you have a choice of either using it as a regular portal or entering that dungeon.
Oh, gotcha.
It becomes a dungeon. You flip it over, and now you've got different little effects that you have to deal with. You're trying to collect crystals, and to some extent you can do them in any order you want, except for that main big box is your last dungeon you have to enter to face kind of the big boss. And it's well done. Generally speaking, it's well done. It plays enough like the standard mode that you don't feel like you're learning an entirely new game, but I do feel like there's a little bit more upkeep than I would like as far as kind of managing what I need to be doing at what time. Now, there's no huge AI component you have to worry about. You do trigger the you're playing against an opponent that has the same 4 archetypes, right? The beast, the warrior, and every turn you're flipping over and one of those 4 characters are activating. And you're going to attack and move, basically. They're going to always try to attack first. If they can't attack, then they're going to move and attack. Very rarely will you not be attacked by one of those enemies on your turn. So, yeah, it's a race game to an extent because you're trying to get these crystals every round. You're ticking. You start at 7 rounds, but it's not exactly 7 rounds because every time you capture one of their enemy units, you can move it back 2 rounds. So it's this little give and take of how quickly can I go after these crystals, but I can't ignore the enemies because A, they're knocking me out, and B, I have to get some time back. So it's interesting. It's probably not my favorite of the Tiny Epic solo variants. I mean, Tiny Epic Quest is my favorite, and Galaxies. This is what I would say in mid-range of the solo modes for the Tiny Epic games.
Cool. So I think overall, if you really want a game that fits in a tiny box that has that cool 3D thing, check out Tiny Epic Tactics. But yeah, it's Tiny Epic Tactics.
Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks.